Hi, welcome. It is Tuesday, February 1st, 7 p.m. on the East Coast. I always feel weird talking at the beginning because no one's here. And so it's always weird to be like, hi, welcome. And there's nobody here. Leanne is here. Hi, Leanne. It's good to see you.
I love her FOMO comment.
Yep. Thanks for the info. I got Facebook and YouTube running FOMO on the chats for sure. Deirdre. Hey, Deirdre. All right. So if you're just joining us, we always get started a couple minutes afterwards, after the hour. So say hello, say where you're from, give a shout out, and let's see, what's tonight's good question? Favorite pasta, not dish, like pasta, like macaroni, ziti, penne, linguine. Favorite pasta. Oh, hi, Mom. That's awkward.
Long time no see, Liz.
Oh yeah, Mom. This is my therapist, Michelle. You remember her? Yeah, good to see her. Eric B in the house from Houston. We have an amazing, if you can't tell, we have a really incredible panel tonight with myself, Shala, and Kimberly. Michelle's here too. With that, if you're just tuning in, please say hi. Let us know where you're from and your nobody said favorite. Leave it to. So Eric's won pretty much every trivia that we've ever done, including all the big. Eric is insanely brilliant, and I've never even heard of that pasta. So thank you for that. Hi, Natalie. So give yourself a shout out where you're from and favorite pasta. I think it's Shala. Do you have a favorite pasta?
Angel hair.
Angel hair. What about you, Kim?
I would have to say penne.
Penne. And Michelle?
I think it depends on how I'm eating it. Like I think my go-to is rotini, but if I'm having mac and cheese, obviously. But macaroni is not good just like sauce, right? It's good as a macaroni and cheese.
Yeah. Maryland, South Louisiana elbow macaroni. That's very specific. I like that. And Kim, I'm with you. If the dish comes with pasta, I always ask them to substitute penne because it tastes better. All right. With that, welcome. Thank you for being here. If you're just joining us, this is OCD and COVID 2 years later, a town hall. My name is Ethan. I'm a national advocate for the International OCD Foundation, which simply means, if you don't know by now, I just have to keep talking about it until we have a treatment and it's accessible and affordable and effective and keep on keeping on. So, Deirdre, I couldn't see your pasta answer. Oh, fettuccine. Nope, that's Beth. Just kidding. Deirdre. No, I didn't. Did I miss your? Oh, cavatelli. Yeah, cavatelli.
Is that the same thing that Eric wrote? Just they spelled it differently?
Farfalla. I like it. This is fun.
Farfalla's good.
Farfalla is good. We'll stay on topic, but keep putting in your name, where you're from, and your favorite pasta. So tonight we have an amazing panel with you. We're super excited to get into this. We did town halls very early on. In fact, COVID is kind of what started our whole town hall virtual programming, where we wanted to support the community and have the community support us and be here during the early onset of COVID when we were all kind of quarantining going, oh my gosh, what's going on? So now look at us, 2-something years later, we've got robust programming and amazing people, and we're very excited to dive in. So let's get some housekeeping out of the way. So this town hall is intended to serve as educational content. It is not intended to replace therapy. For treatment-related questions, please be sure to work with your local provider or contact a local clinician. The National OCD Foundation is not a crisis hotline. It should not be used if you're in distress or feel unsafe. If you're in a crisis or ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room, call 911, or call the Suicide Prevention Hotline at 800-273-8255. We also always want to be respectful and kind to others. We try to create a safe space as possible. Keep in mind that this is on social media and online. So when you're asking personal questions or vulnerable questions, keep that in mind. But with that being said, we're here to support you support us, and have a really meaningful conversation. This is great. So many good pastas. Hi, Phyllis. Good to see you. Hey, Joanna. Eric is in the house again. Allison in Beacon, New York. It's good to have everybody. So let's jump to it. Let's get to our panelists and dive in. And by the way, hey, Alexandra, good to see you. So tonight we'll start out as usual with the time. We haven't done town hall in a while. We'll talk for maybe the first 45 minutes, just to answer questions and stuff like that. Please feel free to pick questions in the comment thread, and we'll incorporate them as we go. Of course, for the last 45 minutes, we'll do a big Q&A. So feel free to load your questions. in the comment thread, or wait, we'll go in order. With that, first we have Miss Shala Nicely. It's good to see Shala. Shala is the author of Is Fred in the Refrigerator, Taming OCD and Reclaiming My Life. And I've said it at the beginning, one of the best OCD memoirs I have ever read. I read it. I was late to reading it. I was late in the game. I read it. I called her. I literally gloated about it for a week. It really is outstanding. So honest plug, if you want a brilliant memoir, Is Fred in the Refrigerator, Amazon. Check it out. And she was a co-author with John Hirschfeld of Everyday Mindfulness for OCD, Tips, Tricks, and Skills for Living Joyfully. She's a counselor and cognitive behavioral therapist in Metro Atlanta, specializing in the treatment of OCD and related disorders and anxiety disorders. Shala produces the Shoulders Back, Tips and Resources for Taming OCD newsletter and blogs for Psychology Today, offering an inside perspective on life with OCD. She is currently working on her third book, a murder mystery called A Day to Die, about the true price of secrets we keep from ourselves. I didn't know the title until now. That's super exciting because I know you've been working on this for a while. So I feel like if you're just tuning in, A Day to Die. So Shala's in the works. We look forward to reading that, Shala. It's great to have you.
Thanks, Ethan. Thanks for your kind words. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me here.
For sure. No, it's an honor to have you. Next, we have Kimberly Quinlan. Kimberly is a licensed marriage and family therapist and has a private practice in Calabasas, California, specializing in anxiety, OCD, and related disorders and eating disorders. Kimberly, I don't know why Australian accent kicked in, is also the co-founder of cbtschool.com, an online psychoeducation platform that provides online courses for those with obsessive compulsive disorder and body-focused repetitive behaviors. Kimberly is the author of the Self-Compassion Workbook for OCD and also a new book that launched in October. It was the top of the charts for many months. It's super fantastic. There's lots of books here, so you'll want to check that out. Self-Compassion Workbook for OCD. She really did a magnificent job. She's also the host of Your Anxiety Toolkit podcast, which also just had 1 million downloads. Right? I'm not making that up, right? Okay, cool. A podcast aimed at providing mindfulness-based tools for anxiety, OCD, depression, and BFRBs. Kimberly has been featured in many world-renowned and prestigious media outlets, such as the Australian newspaper, the Washington Post, the LA Times, the Wall Street Journal, and National Public Radio, NPR. So thank you, Kim, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And finally, we have Michelle Massi. Michelle is a licensed marriage and family therapist and has been treating OCD and OC spectrum disorders for more than 15 years. Michelle Massi has a private practice in Los Angeles. She also provides teletherapy to clients in Florida, Georgia, and Arizona. I'm Georgia. Thank you. In addition to her private practice, Michelle is an IOCDF BTTI faculty member and provides consultations to other clinicians. In the past, Ms. Massi was the Associate Clinical Director at the UCLA OCD Intensive Treatment Program, worked at the UCLA Childhood OCD, Anxiety, and Tic Disorder Program, as well as the UCLA Adult Anxiety Research Program. Thank you for being here, Michelle.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is great. Okay. So first of all, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, everyone who's viewing and watching. Really important topic, and I'm glad we could bring this back. So, okay, let's just start easy. Who thought we were going to be here 2 years later still talking about COVID? Did any of us think that?
I keep making arrangements to go back to, now I don't, but I kept making arrangements to go back into the office. I'd email my employees being like, hey, when are you thinking about wanting to go back? I remember coming back from maternity leave, last Memorial Day and a year and a half ago, whatever, and thinking, okay, it'll just be a couple months and then we'll be back. And no.
Shala, what about you? Did you think we'd be here 2.5 years later?
No, I think when you and Kimberly and I did one of these first ones, I thought it would be a couple weeks or a couple months. This somewhat shocking to be here 2 years later.
Kim?
Yeah, same. I think I have had individual conversations with all of you of okay, not too long to go. Yeah, it's actually not the case, but
apparently our crystal balls are all broken.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me quickly switch back over. Hey, Valerie Andrews, good to see you. Yes, we will put the names of the books in the chat for sure. No problem at all. So I think my first question is generally, how have you seen, we talked briefly, we talked a few times at the onset of COVID and how it may impact the OCD community as a whole. We saw how it impacted a variety of individuals with certain subtypes and symptoms, more so than others, whether that's health anxiety, moral scrupulosity, just right, health anxiety, I think I said that, and other symptoms that weren't quite as affected. We talked about individuals that had exposure response prevention therapy being more, in some ways, more equipped to deal with the uncertainty surrounding COVID and OCD. And we did some articles about it. I was interviewed on it. We all talked about that. Do you think, well, let me ask this. Do you think the way we approach COVID as an OCD community has changed since the beginning? I'll start with Kim on that one.
Well, I think I'm going to give a personal, I think as a community, we've come together. I think one of the, there's so much hardship that's come from COVID, but one of the gifts was that we were now able to just connect via online communities like this. And I think it gave a lot of people opportunities to access what they weren't getting access to. So I think as a community, I'm actually super excited and proud of how the community has held together. It's also a time of a lot of conflict, in like political conflict and so forth. And I feel like we've stuck together really well throughout that. So I'm really actually quite proud of us.
Me too. Shala, what are you thinking?
If you look at our response to COVID at the beginning, it's almost a metaphor for how we would respond to OCD if it were really flaring up, right? Like, oh my gosh, we've got all these really scary triggers and what do we do? And then as the couple of years have gone by, we've gotten used to that. We've gotten used to the fact that COVID is here, the pandemic is here. Sort of like you get used to the fact that you have intrusive thoughts, that anxiety is going to be there, and trying to learn how to live the best life you can, knowing that stuff is going to be there. Even if you're really in a great recovery from OCD, you're still going to have intrusive thoughts. You're still going to have anxiety sometimes. And so I think that how the OCD community has handled it is really, it's sort of a macrocosm of what we deal with on an individual basis, either as people with OCD or therapists helping people with OCD. So I think that we've done well. Like Kimberly said, I'm proud of how the community has done, because it's been really challenging for us, sometimes in different ways than it is challenging for other people. And I think we've been able to navigate that well.
Michelle.
I don't really have anything to add. I feel like we've, as a community, both in OCD and just in the world, we've sort of all done this. And every time, we have an explosion of a new variant, or like at the very beginning, as an OCD therapist at the very beginning, before it came to the United States, I was telling my clients, you don't need to go buy Lysol, or, I was like, it's not a big deal. Right. And then we all sort of went into, oh my God, we need to wipe down our, groceries, and then back to, okay, we don't need to wipe down our groceries. We don't need to be doing all these things. The only thing I will add is I think it's been interesting as an OCD therapist the last couple of years to figure out how do we do exposures, especially around contamination, and sort of swung to the, okay, let's not do anything contamination related, and let's do all the hand washing and allowing our clients to use hand sanitizer, and then trying to figure out where that happy medium is now and going sort of back. It's very weird as an OCD therapist. I think I said this, in past town halls, of having hand sanitizer in my office. I have a really hard time with that. So it's been an interesting, I think, it's like one of the pendulum swings of trying to figure out where we're going to land.
Absolutely. And if you're just joining us, welcome. 90 minutes of COVID and OCD 2 years later. We did a bunch of these town halls when the onset of COVID, and thought it'd be a good idea to sort of revisit where we are and where we're going and what we need to do and all of those things. So as always, if you have questions or comments, please put them in the comment thread, and we will continue to read them and integrate them into our talk. We'll do a Q&A as well. So just wanted to remind people of that. Shala, what have you seen? Because this leads me into the next question. What have you seen in your own practice in terms of sort of the evolution over the last 2 years of individuals with OCD, how they've responded to COVID, different variants? Have you seen people getting tired, less willing to deal with the discomfort or uncertainty, more willing and more able? What have you seen?
I think the evolution started with, there was a lot more contamination, scrupulosity around getting other people sick, and also just a lot more people seeking services, a lot more people who I hadn't seen for years who needed to come in for boosters all of a sudden. And I think, like Michelle said, that will ebb and flow, I think, now based on the variants. But I think that, what I've seen most recently is people really struggling when they have OCD plus some sort of chronic medical condition. And they're trying to manage their OCD, they're trying to manage their physical health, and their friends and family may be doing different things than they want to do. And then them trying to figure out, well, is this OCD that I'm acting on, or is this me really trying to safeguard my health? And like Michelle said too, it's trying to, what is that middle ground there? So I think that's what I see people working on the most right now. So that's the evolution I've seen in my practice the past couple of years.
Michelle, have you seen similar in your own?
Yeah, I mean, I know, like, I can think of one client in particular whose OCD, at the very beginning of COVID really, really spiked. Obviously, lots of clients who fit into this. And then as like things have calmed down and they've sort of seen, and we've gotten the vaccine and stuff like that, things have sort of, plateaued out. I think, Alexandra said in the comments something similar to what my clients are experiencing, is that it's just the fatigue now. It's sort of like one of my clients actually said she felt like she was being gaslit by her friends because, she's still taking, I was going to say OCD, COVID seriously, and, trying to get out, but also trying to be safe and feeling like everybody around her is like, who cares? And so feeling this, I don't necessarily think she's doing, it's too much OCD. And, there was a time where it was a lot of OCD. She wasn't even going out for groceries, even though, it probably was safe enough to do that. And so she's doing a little bit more outside the house, going to restaurants and stuff like that, but feeling gaslit by everybody else who's doing so much more. And I think a lot of people, with the travel, a lot of our clients are feeling like left out or FOMO because here's all these people doing this. I had a client who took all these precautions because they didn't want to get their child sick. And then all of a sudden their child got COVID, and it was like, okay, well, what was the point of staying in for this whole time if they were going to get sick anyway? And so it's sort of like that whole like back and forth of like, I'm trying to do everything right, and the fruits of my labor aren't coming. So that's sort of where I'm seeing people at.
That makes sense. I love what Lisa Smith wrote at 7:14 p.m. She wrote, I'm starting to sometimes feel like a skilled warrior. It's because I have experienced a lifetime living with OCD. And that's sort of what we've talked about. Kim, what about you? Have you seen similar? I saw you nod your head when Michelle answered.
Yeah, but I think I've had the same experience as both. So the first thing that comes to mind is just the massive influx of people needing services right now, and squeezing people in, and wait lists, and trying to find clinicians to serve them. That has been probably the biggest hurdle for me in my private practice. But on a personal level for the patients, I agree. I think it's really hard to watch people, have different views on different, even a lot of people I speak with on social media will say, I'm masked up, I'm cleaning, but my roommate isn't. And the frustration of feeling disrespected in that way has been very difficult. And then them saying, oh, that's your OCD, when it's like, no, this is my values, or this is what I would have done had I had OCD or not. And then the final piece, I think, is I think that a lot of my patients have started to recognize that being isolated and quarantined has provided them an opportunity to do a lot of avoidant compulsions, which is really cool that they have the honesty to say, I actually think I need to push myself a little more, even though even their family is saying, no, stay home. And they're like, I can feel this becoming very compulsive. So that's been really cool to see.
Absolutely. How have you seen, I remember talking to all of you and so many other therapists and clinicians at the beginning. Do you all feel like as clinicians, you've sort of found sort of your balance with all of this? Because at the beginning, when we were doing town halls, clinicians were asking as many questions. I mean, you're human beings. We forget that sometimes. You were asking just as many questions as like, well, I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing right now. And I don't know how to help you because I'm scared too. And like, do you feel like you found sort of your footing in all of this, or does it continue to wax and wane along with us, with the variants and all that stuff. Go ahead, Shala.
I think it'll wax and wane. I think that, for instance, none of us were expecting the Omicron variant to do what it did. And I think when something like that happens, we're caught along in the tide with everybody else of what do we do now? I think that we might come to an equilibrium about where we are with therapy work a little bit faster just because we've been doing this for a couple of years. But still, we can get affected by big changes just like everybody else does.
Yeah. Yeah. Michelle, what have we seen? And Puccini just said, I have a child with OCD. Thanks so much for the book referrals. He had tic disorder, probably Tourette's, but as COVID began, his OCD progressed into being unmanageable. We're sorry to hear that, Puccini. If you want to give us other details, we're happy to weigh in or give you additional lines of support. What have we seen with school-age children and with OCD and related disorders in the onset of COVID over the last 2 years, especially in the classroom?
I've seen an influx of clients, of kiddos who are struggling. The combination of things, right, is the first one of being home and being on screens all day long and being able to avoid. And then when they went back to school, the difficulty with going back to school and figuring out how to integrate, being at home and like being able to have access to going to the bathroom and washing their hands every 5 minutes. I think for some of my kiddos, as they went back to school, it actually was better because they didn't have access to the bathroom 24/7. They couldn't run to the bathroom. So it was a very interesting for some. I sort of compare it to tics. For some kids with tics, their tics are worse during the summer break when they're home and they're relaxed and they can tic all that time. And some of my clients are worse during school because it's more stressful. And so I found that with the contamination with the kids, like some kids thrived at home and some kids really struggled at home. But we've definitely seen an uptick both in, addressing her comment or his comment on tics as well as the OCD.
Go ahead, Kim.
No, I agree. I mean, I can only speak for my clients and my own children. I think it's really testing their resilience. And I think they're showing us that they are incredibly resilient, which I think is one of the great pieces that we can sort of congratulate them on. In terms of what we see, I mean, I'm seeing very much the same as what we often are seeing. It's just that the parents are more taxed. They're completely maxed. And so we're doing a lot more support for parents. They're often getting lots less services as well. And so we're really looking at, trying to get them help because they once upon a time maybe had someone come to the house to be a behavioral coach or skills training, or they may have had the support services that they don't have right now.
Thank you, Kim. And as always, please, if you're joining us, please feel free to put questions in the comment thread. We'd love to answer them or just comments. Y'all are always your best advocates, and we always appreciate that. So thank you. We'll keep going down, though. Lots and lots to talk about. Let's talk about, there's 2 things I have to say. There's always 20 things I have to say, but I'll stick with 2. The first thing, Shala and I were talking over email, and she was talking about news. And I know that we sort of had our rules at the beginning when we talked about, okay, just 20 seconds. That's what we're going to do. No more, no less. Your OCD is never going to be satisfied. We're going to do 20 seconds and, monitor your news intake. Maybe pick one time out of the day, 15 minutes, depending on. And I found myself when Omicron hit completely unaware that I was addicted to the news again. I was like constantly looking at the news for 2 or 3 weeks and realizing how anxious it was making me. Shala, and we talked a little bit about it because, the clickbait of the news is, you see new variant and you're like, it is. It's like, oh my God, what is it now? Remember when we used to get news updates on our phones? It's like, oh, what's this? And now you see the update come up. They're like, oh, I'm scared to click on it. Like, what's it going to say? What are your thoughts on, really just how to handle the news, visibility to the news? Like, what kind of cues should we take as individuals with OCD to rather determine sort of our intake or not intake, outtake, less take? Go ahead, Shala.
I think this is a really important topic for a couple reasons. One is with OCD, there can be an avoidant compulsion to I'm not going to look at the news because it's going to trigger some obsession I don't want to deal with or get me into some compulsion I don't want to have to fight. that's not what we're talking about here. I think that overexposure to news when things are really going poorly in the world tanks our mood, makes us more anxious, generally reinforces OCD's view that the world is dangerous and out to get you and contaminated, and thereby creates an increase in your OCD symptoms. And I think what we're talking about is really mood management here. Like you were saying, Ethan, you watched it for a couple of weeks and you felt yourself just getting more overall anxious. And so I think really being honest with yourself about how often are you checking the news? Are you going every couple hours, every couple of days? You know, what is it? And recognize what you're doing. Like a lot of times we'll pick up our phone because we're bored and we want this little hit of dopamine that we'll get by getting some new information, but it's also relieving anxiety if we're satisfying some need to know compulsion that OCD wants us to do. And I think really being aware of why you're picking up your phone, why you need to know about the news right now, and just also what is your general mood state. And if you're finding that you're anxious, you're more depressed than normal, you're just feeling like the world's a bad place, just saying, you know what, cold turkey, I'm just not going to look at the news anymore. I'm going to ask friends and family to let me know if there's something I need to know about, but I'm just going to get off the news. And it's really hard to do that first getting off, but then you can look and watch your mood sort of slowly go back up. And I think it's a little bit of trial and error trying to figure out what is the best formula for you. But I think being cognizant and aware of it can have a really negative effect on you over time.
It's especially hard because the news is constantly being reiterated on social. So it's like you may not watch the news and you go on your feed and like everybody's going, did you see what they said? And you're like, no, I don't want to see it. Michelle,
And not just
go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to add was that, you know, first I'll say one thing I suggest to clients is really limiting not just how much you look at the news, but also how many sources, right? Maybe pick one, maybe pick two sources and keep it at that so that you're not getting, because everybody's going to have their own spin on the story and you've got a lot of information that's incorrect. But I was just going to add that even on sources, you know, I don't know how many of you guys have the Citizen app. That's something I have. But even on that, which is, you know, all about safety in my neighborhood, I'm getting, you know, updates about the different variants of COVID. And so I got it there, and then I've got it on social media, and then, you know, a CNN update and an Apple News update, and it's just so many things. So it's sort of recognizing, like, do I turn off the notifications on my phone so it doesn't automatically pop up that I actually have to go search for it? You know, or limiting, I know Apple has this new ability to, I forget what they call it, sort of like group or summarize your notifications for certain apps at different times of day. So you maybe just getting all the news information at one time during the day, doing something like that. But I agree with what Shala said and, you know, sort of what you alluded to, Ethan.
Kim, I want to throw, I'm seeing a lot of comments from parents. So let's, I'm going to throw this to Kim, which is, I don't know that it's any different from adults, and we're going to talk about treatment and therapy, but what would you say to parents whose kids or children, whether it's school age or older, you know, have OCD or diagnosed with OCD, and we're managing, and then with the onset of COVID have really just declined and are having a hard time dealing with OCD? There's a couple comments in the thread about individuals whose kids, you know, really struggle with the onset of COVID, and now that it's an ongoing thing, you know, it seems like it's a pandemic and feels like it's going to be here. I guess it's easy to equate and assume that, oh, well, now my child is always going to feel or act or be this way, because that's not going away too. So what are your thoughts on some ways to address for parents? Yeah. You're on mute. I'm sure it'd be good, but yeah.
I think that any case of OCD will often, you know, not always, but often onset around a stressful event. That can be the case for many people, not always, but I think it's important to understand that even though the onset was triggered by this scenario, that recovery is still very, very possible. And to not hold back if you have access to resources, to try and get those resources, not only for your child, but for you as the parent too. I think parents are exhausted, completely burnt out, every emotion. Like, I feel like emotional just talking about it. It's so hard to watch your child suffer in addition to having a mental illness, but also just to see them not get to experience the birthday parties and the cheer squads or whatever that they wish that they could have done. So I think it's important, if you have access, to get resources. Recovery is still very, very possible, even though we are dealing with COVID. In fact, I've actually seen that using online teletherapy has really helped a lot of kids, because they can do therapy from home where their triggers are. You can do exposures online. And so there's, I really would hope that you take what I'm saying into your mind and really know that it's still possible for your children to thrive and live a good life. Does it mean that again, this is where I'm saying, doesn't mean that it's all your job. No, if you can use the IOCDF for support, get as many resources as you can.
I think that's such a great way to put it, because it's like, it's not only, it's still not too late, but it's, one of the silver linings of COVID is that virtual therapy is so abundant now, whereas you live near a big city before, or needed to drive 3 hours. It's like, look for someone licensed in your state, and that's, so I think that the most important thing for any parent here that has a child that's really struggling with OCD, especially amidst the onset of COVID, is that there is help, there's treatment, there's hope. And by no means should you feel hopeless in the situation, as these variants and news articles and all this stuff comes out about COVID being here for the long time and all that. That absolutely does not equate to, your child is also going to suffer for that amount of time. So I think that's important. I thought Shala had something to say, but she just wanted to. Do you have anything to add, Shala or Michelle?
Other than coughing, no.
Okay. We appreciate it. It was insightful.
The only thing I would add is that I don't know it's any different from adults, is that I think we're all going through this again, where, some days are better than others, and we all just need the resources.
Thank you. I didn't realize you were going to stop there.
Sorry.
The resources. I'm like, what?
The resources.
What resources? I like what Eric wrote at 7:22 p.m., which is for someone with moral scrupulosity and responsibility obsessions. It feels like the first year was easier. Now people are all over the map, and it's hard to know exactly what is right to do. This is so much good stuff to glean from this, because I think even in the beginning we were going like, well, the county says that, the government says that, the feds say that, the state says that, and my parents say this, and okay. But Michelle is not Michelle. Kim is smirking, but I'm going to go to Shala on this, and Kim, you can weigh in. Which is so, Kim, what is the right?
Shala.
You're all my friends. I just love you all. I don't even know what to say at this point. Shala, what is the right thing to do?
This is such a good topic. So I'm so thankful that someone brought this up. Was that Eric, did you say?
Yeah.
Thank you, Eric, for bringing this up. I think with OCD, and I have OCD too, so I think all of us with OCD, our tendency is to say there's a right or a wrong, or a black and white way to do things. And so it's very confusing to us when you see multiple different options out there. And I think that has proliferated over the past 6 months or so, with different people having different levels of risk aversion or risk toleration. And so when we see somebody doing something opposite of what we're doing, we think, oh, we must be wrong, or they must be wrong, right? Somebody's got to be wrong here. And I think the exposure is to go into the middle and say there are multiple right answers. And the right answers depend upon someone's risk toleration variables. I mean, whether they have vulnerability factors to COVID, whether they have a vulnerable person at home, whether they've had COVID, vaccinations, all that. And so I think recognizing there are lots of factors here, and saying that, gosh, I'm going to look at all these people doing all these things and recognize my choices are okay too. And that's the exposure, is sitting in that uncertainty of it feels sort of wrong because other people are doing different things, but saying we can all be right based on our own different risk calculations, and really accepting that sort of uncertainty.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the main thing here is I've seen a lot of my patients get stuck in ruminating on the right answer, right? As if there was one. And a lot of it's 2020 hindsight, right? So we wouldn't know. And so I think it's important for particularly those who have anxiety is maybe even like set yourself an amount of time to which you can make that decision, because you could go down a rabbit hole of research, or you could go through a rabbit hole of reassurance seeking to try and figure out what that right is, but there isn't a right answer. So yeah, I think building some skills around decision making is such an important skill at this particular time.
Michelle, thoughts?
I don't have anything to add. Okay, you caught me. I was totally texting with you guys. Yeah, don't have anything to add.
For sure. No.
They're so smart. No, I mean, I think what I was going back with Eric was, it's so interesting for his moral scrupulosity that it was easier because everybody was home and nobody was going anywhere. And now people are going places. And so feeling more responsible because it's getting out there too. But yeah, there is no right.
I think this leans into Eric, and this leans into, actually he made a great comment. And please feel free to ask. We have an amazing panel, so feel free to ask questions. We're glad you're enjoying the conversation. Eric at 728 wrote, but even the news is confusing. I've been trying to listen to science and the experts, but even the experts seem to disagree on a lot of things. So I'll just speak from my own personal experience for a sec, is that my OCD very much wants to protect me from everything it doesn't know yet. So for me, so my OCD will use the facts that it has to justify behavior that it wants me to do. So it's going to say, first, we didn't need to wear masks. We should wear masks. First, they said this, that you're going to need to do that. And when you didn't watch the answer. So my OCD is going, well, the scientists don't really know, and they keep changing their mind, and all these people are saying different things. So you just need to protect yourself from everything because it's all going to change anyway. And I was emailing somebody about this very conversation. It's like, for years I took Zantac because it really helped with my antacid, and heartburn. And then a year ago, it was like, oh, it may cause cancer. We're taking it off the shelves. And it's like, how long was it on the shelf? And it's like, I could have either not taken any medication, expecting at any given day, they could determine that broccoli may kill you, or, I can take Zantac and eat broccoli until I find out that information and cross that bridge when I come to it. But it's really hard to do, A, with the news, but B, with the cycle of the information constantly changing. But do you agree that's important to sort of take across that bridge mentality when you come to it, even if the information is changing as quickly as daily or weekly? It's like, well, this is what we know right now. So that's how I'm going to live my life until there's some other piece of information I need to know.
And I think, I think the major thing going on right now, I totally agree with that part. I think the major thing going on right now, and we've seen it over COVID, is when we're saying experts, who are we considering experts, right? Who are we allowing? Yes, the experts are changing. Even if you follow Dr. Fauci or the CDC, even they've changed, right? Originally, like you said, no masks. Now they say masks. Now they say what kind of masks, and it's changed. But there's also this, people getting up there and speaking and saying they have, a doctorate. And yet we find out sort of Dr. Phil, he doesn't have a doctorate in psychology. Not that I'm saying that any of these are saying they have a doctorate in psychology, but kind of the same thing is, what is their specialty in and what are they speaking on as experts? And so I think it's, going back to the news conversation, is who are we following, and are we making sure that what we're looking for is actual good sources of information, because we can get wrapped up. I remember seeing somebody online and talking about wiping down our groceries at the very beginning, and it turned out it was somebody who, yes, they were a doctor, but they didn't study immunology or any of these kind of viruses. And so was that somebody that made sense to be sharing that information? So that's the only thing I wanted to add there. It's been sort of trying to figure out which experts to listen to.
Yeah. One thing that we talk about with our patients is around the news is actually to listen to the news with a curiosity instead of being such an absorber of it. Because don't forget, they're selling live time so that they can then sell advertisements. They've got to keep you on. And so what I encourage patients to do, and what we do through my practice, is we do an exercise where we listen to a small piece of news, and we say, let's just look for the facts, like where someone actually, because you will find most of what they're reporting is words like you may find, or this could happen. And really, they're just projecting ideas. You're going to it for the news, but you're actually just getting projections. So it's important as you're listening to just be listening for facts. And often what you'll be disappointed by is you'll leave with very few facts and a lot of projections. But that can actually help you pull back and not catastrophizing what you've just listened to. Particularly when you're listening to experts. A lot of them now are using language like may, could, and they're really admitting that they don't know either.
Shala, back to news a second. This is a great segue, and I'm just going to keep pulling from my own experience. Everybody's talking about the right way or the wrong way to approach things, and sometimes I think to myself, I'm just going to live my own life and not pay attention, and I'm going to do my own thing. But then not paying attention seems kind of irresponsible, like the cat that just walked behind me. I was paying attention, but not paying attention seems kind of irresponsible. And so therefore, like, oh, well, maybe I should plug in just a little bit so I can at least be informed in a healthy way. Like, is there a balance between like doing my own thing, but also staying abreast of the news that I need to know?
Yes. And I think this whole is the responsible thing to do can be just the way people are, or it can be part of scrupulosity, right? It could run both. Like it's the responsible thing to know what's going on. But I think looking at, if I check the news, will that materially change the decisions that I'm making on a day-to-day basis? And if it doesn't, then I think pulling back from the news is important. I think I was tracking it. I made it either 2.5 or 3 months in the fall, not looking at the news at all, not one thing. And sometimes I'd go on Twitter. I'm like, oh, no, the news. I can't look at that. Turn it off. Because I wanted to try this as an experiment. And so I had no idea what was going on. And my thought was, if something big happens, somebody's going to tell me about it. I'm going to hear about it. But I'm not going to change my behavior based on anything that I've heard. So I'm just going to not plug in for a while. And I think it was an experiment for me. So I think that's the other thing you can do, is try some experiments and see what works and what doesn't work. Do the scrupulosity experiment of being an irresponsible person and not getting on the news, for instance. And recognize that OCD can affect us in very subtle ways around these kind of topics.
Go ahead, Kim.
Yeah, let me just add, because I just picked up on a couple of words that you used, is I noticed you use words like should. I should be abreast with the news. I should be, it would be irresponsible. And I always try to turn a should into I could. What you're going to find here is we are, as a nation/world, exhausted. We are wiped. This is so much, right? And so when we are being pushed to the limit, it's the most kind, compassionate thing you can do is actually to look at sort of the rules that you have for yourself and make adjustments, given that you've already got enough pressure. So if you're finding that you're having should statements of any kind, take a look at that, and maybe it's time to renegotiate with yourself these expectations that you have. Now is maybe not the time to be having these shoulds about, not only should I handle my OCD and go through a worldwide pandemic, and I should listen to the news. Okay, maybe you can give yourself the compassionate, let go of that should.
Michelle, what's a good reminder to do that? Because as I'm listening to Kim and Shala talk, we're talking about the news, but we've also talked, Eric and so many have already commented about, the discrepancies in information from different officials, but we haven't even talked about geography. So I've been taking a lot of meetings in Connecticut or the Northeast, and and they're like, oh, I went to get a haircut, and they had these partitions in between the things, and everybody was wearing masks and shields. And I went to get a haircut, and everybody was blowing on me for fun, because I live in just south of Atlanta in Georgia. So I mean, so then it's so funny because you may not be paying attention to the news, but then you talk to other people in different parts of the country, depending, and then that gets you in your head of well, should I have done that? Maybe I was irresponsible. I don't know. You know, how do we continue to remind ourselves to be observers and to, you know, take I should statements and to I could, and yeah.
I think it's anything within what we do for practice for OCD is like reminding ourselves, I need to practice my exposures. I should be practicing my exposures. It's sort of part of everyday life of, you know, something I've said to you, something I've said to multiple clients today is we want to live our lives and make decisions based on values, not emotions, and not based on feelings. So sort of just checking in, maybe having, I don't like to say mantras because then I think sometimes those can be compulsions or can become compulsions, but sort of checking in with ourselves of like, why am I making decisions or why am I taking actions? I think it's, even if you don't have OCD, right, we have to constantly check in with ourselves of like why we're making choices of things based on our morals or our values or our emotions or where we're at in a specific season. So, and I know like being in California, we're definitely more, I don't want to say locked down here than in other places in the United States. But we even see it on social media, like a friend going out, like, you know, I actually, there's somebody I follow on Instagram and they live up in Washington and they took their kids to the mall and nobody was wearing masks. And I went, no, like there was part of me that was like, oh no. And part of me that was like, I'm so jealous. Right. So I think it's right after I had that thought, then I sort of checked myself and went, not my problem, not my life. You know, like I don't need to worry about what they're doing. I have to look at like where I'm at and what feels comfortable to me without letting the anxiety and OCD overtake that. It's a balance.
Yeah. Anyone else have anything to add before I move on to other topics? It is a balance and it's difficult. I was reading Wendy O's comment at 7:30 p.m. I have an elderly mom and stepfather who I take care of and also a grandfather in assisted living. So this has been so hard as I am always fearful to getting them sick and the entire assisted living place gets sick. So just to Kim said, there's just, as Kim said, there's just so much to navigate and so much fatigue and wear and tear, and everybody's got their own instances and situations that, you know, giant sort of rules don't apply to everyone. Everybody's kind of got unique. Go ahead, Michelle.
I was just going to say, and we can do, you know, like it happened to my client, we can do everything right and still get COVID or still like pass along COVID. And I think we all look at what we value, and not that anyone's values are right versus wrong, but what we value, what's important in that moment to us and how we're going to live our life. You know, to me, I really want to spend time with my grandmother and have my child meet their great grandparent. And I'm going to adjust certain things I do so that I can make that happen. And as much as I would hate if I got her sick, I also know that there's not a whole lot I could do to prevent, you know, if I didn't know if I'm asymptomatic, I'm limited.
Yeah, for sure.
And so jump in
ahead,
before you go on, and I'm going to take a page from Kimberly's book, literally, and say, I think Wendy and everybody out there, be compassionate with yourself, right? Because this is really hard. As Kimberly also says, we are wiped. We're really tired. And if you have OCD, you're probably even more tired. And so recognize that giving yourself compassion, and I will just plug Kimberly's book because it is amazing and a great tool for you to have right now in your toolbox if you have OCD, is to really work on taking care of yourself every time that you're experiencing anxiety or regret or guilt or fear around any of this, because that really helps to provide a good foundation for your OCD recovery and for living into your values, as Michelle said.
Right. Thank you for that. That's so kind. I also think it's important just to be aware of the stigma attached to getting COVID. I think that's been a huge thing, a lot of shame around it, as if, you know, are you in the club of people who've gotten it? And I think the cool thing is I've even seen articles in the New York Times and other big, newspapers that are talking now about that with Omicron, that slowly they have noticed a reduction in that shame. And so just to keep an eye out for the shame of whether you're like good and badding yourself if you did get COVID, you know, try not to think in that black and white way of like, I'm a good person or a bad person, because then you will get caught up in sort of shame-like behaviors.
And it's super weird because I think I apologize, my cats are going nuts. And I'm alone tonight, so I can't kick. Anyway, so it's so interesting that you brought that up, Kim, because I think we've all felt that way at a certain point where we did that one thing that felt really irresponsible because of COVID. And the next morning, I woke up and was like, oh my God, why did I do it? I went to a wedding, like, outside on a windy day, like where people were, and I was like, oh my God, what did I do? Why did I do it? I mean, it was like, you would have thought, but I really felt that like I just made the worst decision of my life.
No.
And I'm sure we've all been there. I want to touch on something. I'm going to skip down because I think this is important, and I'm gonna jump on Kim for this, and then because what?
Don't jump on me.
Okay, so, all right.
Of that.
What was the comment she made in our last conversation that like that's still around?
No, we don't go. We should have gotten shirts made. No, but I do want to talk real quick. Peach C. I'm going to skip some of her comments, but at 7:32, she wrote, "This is all new to me. We have found that my 10-year-old daughter battles with OCD." And she goes on to talk about some of the things that her daughter's experiencing. At 7:42 p.m., Heather, she wrote, "She is constantly looking for reassurance, and her intrusive thoughts are very frequent. She's also washing her hands often and feeling the need to shower or wash multiple times." What I want Kim and then subsequently Shala and Michelle to speak on, though, is at 7:43, Peach wrote, "I really don't know when the OCD began taking place. It makes me sad to think that I failed to see the signs." And this breaks my heart because it is not us as sufferers or parents of sufferers that are failing in this case. And I talk a lot about this, but I want all of us to speak about this because I think it's really important. Kim, I'll start you off.
Yeah. I mean, I really hope that you can listen to what everyone's saying here and really remind yourself that, number one, and I have to remind myself this as a parent all the time too, is you weren't trained to pick up the signs. So why would you ever think you would? My kids this morning, my son picked up mistake I had made, and I said something along the lines of like, don't forget, this is the first time I've ever done this, right? It's the first time I've ever been a parent. And how would you have known? And so I think it's important to not get caught up in the woulda, shoulda, couldas, and instead just give yourself permission that you only know what you know, and there's so much we don't know. And so first, just to be really gentle with yourself. The other thing is, we here are trying our best to educate people on the signs, but there's still so much miseducation about the common signs of OCD, so I think it's important that you give yourself grace there as much as you can. And then the last piece is, I know it's cliche, but you have to put the mask on you, the oxygen mask on you first, because I know as a parent, my children don't have OCD, but there are so many times where my capacity to notice things is so small. We're here getting through, doing things, trying to just figure out life as of self. So please be gentle with yourself. This is, you're allowed to drop all the balls at this point, I think is helpful advice.
So what do you say to your second child, Kim, who says that you didn't do it right?
That was her second child.
Oh, so wait, you've had your first child to get it right. What's going on?
No, this is the first time I've ever been a parent of two children.
All right. Michelle or Shala, anything to add?
I do. So two things that came to mind. One of the things I've noticed as I've worked with kids over the years and as I've done research with kids is that the kids who come into therapy earlier on tend to be kids of parents with OCD, because all of a sudden they'll notice the symptoms that maybe their parents missed in them. Whereas, I think, and that's only because they've lived the experience and they've had treatment and whatnot. So they notice the things. Whereas sometimes, individuals who've never had OCD or never seen it or only know it from washing and checking and those kinds of things, easily miss it in their loved ones. I also think it's really hard as a parent to not overdiagnose. We don't want to jump at every little thing. I get this asked by family members and kids I work with of like, oh, my kid. And I sort of joked with one of my therapist friends, when my son started lining everything up, of like, oh my God, he's lining everything up. What does that mean? We don't want to all of a sudden jump to there must be something going on, right? Something I have to address, as opposed to that's also just normal development. So we want to make sure we're not looking at every behavior they do and sort of scanning and checking in and being like, oh, is that weird? Is that a red flag? Do I need to be concerned? And as Kim said, sometimes we as parents have so much going on, we don't have the capacity to notice every little thing. And that's okay. That doesn't make you a bad parent.
Go ahead, Shala. Thank you, Michelle. That's awesome. Those are two awesome points.
From my own experience, I hid my OCD from my parents, my friends, family members for, 25 years. And I think that that's really important to understand, that those of us who have OCD can be exceptionally good at hiding it for all sorts of reasons, including that we don't want to stop doing what we're doing because we think it's the right thing to do. And so nobody can see us because we don't want to be stopped, or we're ashamed that we're doing it, or we know it's strange. And so kids can be really good at hiding this. And so parents wouldn't pick up on it. And that is not your fault as a parent. OCD is just a sneaky disorder. And so echoing both of my colleagues here, is just be super compassionate with yourself about this, because you're not going to pick up on all these signs right away. But it sounds like in this case, Peach has picked up on what's going on now and, working on getting help and information. And that's, going to make a huge impact in your child's life.
Yep. I mean, I can't tell you when my parents when I was 31 and first found the right treatment, and we went in and, they sort of started explaining what treatment looked like and how, parenting can be counterintuitive to exposure and response prevention. My parents always wanting me to not experience pain, not to suffer, to always be okay, and therefore enable and reassure. I mean, the amount of guilt that my parents felt for, not saying it, for doing the wrong thing the whole time. And really, they went through just as much therapy learning that it wasn't their fault. They should not feel guilty. And so, to Shala's point, it's so common, but it really is. And what Kim said, you're not conditioned to see it. You're not conditioned to identify it. And really it's about, giving yourself as much self-compassion as we can, the kiddos. And I mean, we've all talked about this, but, this treatment is a family affair. And so, Peach, if it sounds like, I don't know if your daughter's in treatment, but, make sure that you're involved as well, because, this is very much a family disorder, and OCD impacts everyone in the household. So make sure that you're engaged as well. Mackenzie wrote, actually like this. Mackenzie wrote at 7:35 p.m. I found the more time spent alone with your OCD, the worse the compulsions seemingly get. Isolation measures truly allowed for OCD to overtake many. It's been a difficult time for OCD, but not an impossible one. Thank you for all the resources available. Thank you, Mackenzie. But that poses a question. I think with these waves of variance, we tend to, open up and then button up, and then open up and then button up. When we're sort of back to being holed up, oh my gosh, I can't think of the words. Quarantining. Thank you. I have friends in Connecticut that are still, quarantining and barely leaving their house. What is a good way, Michelle, of, for lack of a better word, to keep the compulsions at bay, to stay in some semblance of a routine? If you are unable to go outside because, you have family that are immunocompromised, you're immunocompromised. If there's a wave that's hitting, how can we alter our routine to you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm going to come back to that. I also want to just pop in there and say something. Mackenzie said the more time spent alone with your OCD, the worse it gets. The same thing I found with depression over the past 2 years. And I just wanted to sort of address that as well, as people have been more isolated, and obviously the worse the depression is, that also impacts the OCD, right? I think regardless of whether or not you're isolated, the more you practice your exposures, the more you're keeping compulsions at bay, and the more you're aware of what you're engaging in. And so regardless of whether or not you're isolated or you're living your life, is that, OCD, while we might get into recovery, OCD is a lifelong, there's no cure for it. So we are constantly, making sure that we are addressing it. And while you may not have to do exposure on a daily basis, if you're at the point of recovery, because you're living your life and you're just basically living exposures. If you're starting to notice that you're sliding back, it's getting back on track and making sure you're practicing your exposures. You may need to talk to your doctor if you're on medication about changing your medication regimen. If you're not in therapy, going back to therapy, just sort of going back to the basics.
Thanks, Michelle. Go ahead.
I would add really quickly that if you have found, you're out and about and then you're going back into quarantine, just do whatever you can to create as much structure into a day as you can. That small act of making structure can keep you afloat, right? It's often the lack of structure when we're in quarantine that really can make things come undone.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Shala.
I think also keeping your compulsions in check a game. So if you're back in quarantine, all right, how many times today can I trigger myself and not do my compulsions? How many times today can I make myself anxious? So the more that you can make it a game, the more you can make it about getting anxious, about finding opportunities to poke at the OCD, I think the easier it is to transform, and maybe easier is the wrong word, but less difficult it is to transform some of these challenging situations like quarantine into something that you can use positively for yourself, but also being compassionate that it's hard. And you may find you just really struggle with OCD during that time, and just giving yourself grace that's okay, to accept where you are, while also at the same time be working with some creative ways to try to get a little bit back on top.
I love that.
I want to add one thing. Yeah. Something I stole, I think, from Grayson this year was, asking my patients, how are you going to challenge OCD today? So that's a question you can ask yourself every day is, what am I going to do to challenge my OCD today? Does that mean I'm doing exposures? Does that mean I'm resisting compulsions? Does that mean I'm journaling? Does that mean I'm doing mindfulness? So.
And thank you. Yeah, I love Grace. I also love Grayson also says, what is OCD taken from you? And that's such a powerful statement for me. That really resonates. Pietro, thank you so much. It's such a blessing to have great people like you be so supportive. I feel a sense of hope, and we're glad you do, Peach. And so please feel free to ask questions. I just lost my place. But that's what we're here for and what we're passionate about. And, you help us as much as we help you. So this is a mutually beneficial conversation. Alexander at 7:35 p.m. wrote, and we touched on this a little bit, that's a whole lot of uncertainty, I think, as we were talking about news and science. How do you advise we handle the mental gymnastics required in risk calculations? I know we touched on some of this stuff. Shala's nodding slightly harder than Michelle. We'll give a quick question to her. Go ahead, Shala.
Well, I think, Alexander, that's a really good question, and mental gymnastics is a really good way to put it, because that's what it is. I think that it's fine if you're finding it really challenging to get out of your head about this, to have a trusted advisor who you could go to and talk through things with one time. Because otherwise you could get into a reassurance-seeking compulsion. But I think if you're getting stuck, using somebody who doesn't have the same kind of OCD you do to help be a sounding board about this is what I'm taking into consideration in this decision I'm making, and this is what I'm leaning to. Does that sound reasonable to you? And then taking their answer. And if this is a person you trust, clearly you'd want to go to somebody you trust, and then going with that. Because otherwise, again, this is a slippery slope. You could head down the reassurance trail, ask 5 people and see where I go. Don't want to do that. But it's okay to turn to others for support in times like this when it's really hard.
Go ahead, Michelle. You're nodding a lot now.
Yeah, no, I agree with what Shala said. I don't remember how long ago, sometime last year, I know there was floating around the internet was a sort of like risk calculation chart. Basically, this is where my life is. This is where I'm living. This is what's going on. I have immunocompromised people around me, or I don't. I'm vaccinated, or I'm not. And sort of like helping you make the decisions. I know they were talking about it originally. It actually might have been 2 holidays ago, talking about do I go travel and see my family for the holidays? And I think you have to decide, there's no, as we've been talking, there's no right answer for anything. And what might work for one person might not work for another person. But, as I agree with what Shala said. What I often tell my clients is look around you. What are your friends doing? What are your other family members doing who don't have OCD? I share sometimes with my clients what I'm comfortable doing. I have a 2-year-old at home that's not vaccinated because he's too young. And, you know, I'm not going to the grocery store and coming home and wiping things down. So maybe that gives you an idea. Now, obviously, just because I'm not doing it doesn't make that right or wrong. But you know, you can sort of see what chances I'm willing to take. Does that help you at all?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Kim.
And all I would add is if you don't have the supportive person or that creates conflict or whatnot, is you can come up with a set of criteria for yourself. So you may dedicate time to make a decision and set a limit with that, put a timer on, because you could, like I said, a decision could take 12 seconds or it could take 12 hours, depending on how much time you give yourself. You may also want to, as I think Michelle said, like pick one source that you trust if you don't have a person that can do that for you on what will help you make that decision. But be very clear. In fact, I have a lot of my patients write a contract for these kinds of things in terms of here are the rules for making decisions. I'm allowed to consult with what, like Shala said, one person, one time, or one article, one time, and then for a certain amount of time, so that you've given yourself some structure around it. And maybe even, you know, have some things that about what you may be triggered by, like comparison. That may be something you want to keep an eye out for. Self-judgment, the idea that there's a perfect decision, and just kind of creating some structure around decision making.
Thank you, Kim. Oh, my mom left a comment. She's never left a comment in the 2 years I've been on this, and it's the Michelle effect. Real quick to the point, Kim, Laura at 7:36 p.m. wrote very good points. She's clearly talking about anything that I said. It is hard to trust your own opinion when OCD throws up so much doubt. Trusting myself to make a decision as and when different situations arise has been an exercise for me. To all of your points, I think what's interesting is that, and I said this at the very beginning, not to be a little smart, but I was really adamant about saying that, the level of uncertainty that exists in the world didn't change because of COVID. Like there's the exact amount of uncertainty that always existed. And I think that's kind of hard to wrap your brain around initially, but it's true. I mean, if we're just aware of it, we're way more aware of it than we have been. I mean, I always thought about, if they decided, if the news collectively decided, or everybody decided to report every time someone died in a car accident, I wouldn't get in a car. Like, could you imagine if that was reported every time? It's like, forget it. We're not getting in a car. It's our awareness of this, but the level of uncertainty is just the same as it was before COVID. It just feels more, icky and potent and in our face. And so if you go in knowing that at any point we could have gotten any disease, and at any point you could have infected an old lady with the flu, and I don't even know if an old lady is PC anymore. I mean, a lovely elderly woman, 90 is the new 60, the whole thing. But no, so I think like reframing it in that way and understanding that, what is our tolerance and what are we willing to live with? And what does it look like to take from our lives and get back from our lives in meaningful ways? Am I similar to, so the way I look at COVID sort of is the way that, and I'm not the best at it. This is by no means, I'm not perfect, but, Michelle will be happy to weigh in on that.
No comment.
All right, thank you. Yes, HIPAA. But anyway, but, the reality of it is, I constantly talk about, my willingness to let certain fears of mine happen because I'd rather choose life over OCD. I don't do that every time, but that is my goal at least. And it's like, we can almost, to Kim's and Shala's and Michelle's point, replace that with COVID. It's like, am I willing to get COVID to do certain things? I hope that I don't. I'm gonna make every effort to try not to and be responsible. But at the end of the day, is seeing family in a safe way just as important as going out to that event or that park, or and you have to determine what's safe for you. But I started looking at COVID a lot like OCD, and like, how much am I willing to let my life be dictated by this thing that I can't control? And the last thing, I haven't talked much this time, so I'm getting, but like the waxing and waning, it's hard. The mental gymnastics, as Alexandra said, I think it's ironic, as many of you know, my significant other, Katie, teaches at a school. And I always tell Michelle in therapy, I'm like, leave it to me to finally find like my person during COVID who teaches at school. like when I have health anxiety. Way to go, Ethan. Like, and I remember when we first moved in together, like, you know, she taught remotely when we were dating and we first moved in. Like, she went back to school and I was a disaster. Like, she came home every day and I was like, how many, where were you? Were they sneezing 6 feet, 12 feet, 3 feet, you know? And then I habituated, because that's what happens. Just like OCD, I totally habituated and I stopped asking questions. I stopped caring. I stopped saying, should we get tested? Summer happened. We did our thing. I don't even think I turned that way during Delta, but then Omicron hit. And I was like, and it hit during Christmas break. And I was like, are you going back, do you think? She's like, yeah. And it all went, upgraded our masks. I upgraded our sanitizer. I was up at midnight trying to find good rapid tests. And like, I've since like kind of subsided. I still UV light the phone, but still, you know, but my point is like, it is hard to like get used to a certain thing and then have to adjust. But like, you know, the friend of OCD is rigidity and its worst enemy is flexibility. And I think that's what this is about, is like, can we remain flexible? Can we remain agile? Can we take what information we have and continue to evolve and still can be compassionate for the things that we did prior moving into that? I don't know if Kim looks proud at what I'm saying or she's smiling. I steal a lot of her and Michelle and Shala's stuff. So I don't know, and claim it as my own.
No, I will just add, and this is for me as a parent, is at the beginning I was making decisions based on COVID numbers, but I think it's really important now that you take like, how's your mental health doing? Suicide, suicidal ideation is at a rocket high level. So like really important to not just look at numbers, but also look at other areas in which we want to take into effect. That has been helpful for me.
Ethan, can I steal your job for a second?
Yeah, for sure.
Can I pick on a comment and address it? Okay. So Christine at 7:54 said, our adult daughter quit her job in healthcare during pandemic. She has OCD and has been living home for over a year, refuses counseling, not going out. Do we set a date she must have counseling by or move out? And I know, Ethan experienced this many, many years ago. He's spoken a lot about it, about his parents setting limits. And I think I can't give you an answer, Christine, because I don't know your whole situation and what I may say here may not apply to you. But I think the thing I can say is you need to get yourself some support, whether it's a therapist who knows OCD treatment or there's something called space therapy, which is treatment specifically for parents of kids. It doesn't have to be young kids. It could be adult kids as well, who are, I would say, treatment resistant, not willing to go to treatment, so that you can help make sure that you don't accommodate her OCD. And this goes for any parent. So if you're struggling and there's a space book out there, there's, trying to talk to a therapist who can help support you if your child isn't willing. And that way you can set up plans for either having them move out or getting them help or whatever that may look like, or even reducing your accommodations so that it doesn't make it easy for them to keep having OCD. So I just wanted to sort of give a blanket kind of statement about that, because I know it comes up a lot as, how do I help my child? And if they can't get into treatment or aren't willing to go, there's so many therapists out there who can help the parents or spouses if, your spouse isn't willing or your partner isn't willing to go to treatment.
Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah.
And did anybody else have anything to add on?
I have one thing to add.
Michelle?
I think when you look at making decisions and trying to identify what risks you're willing to take or not take, I think sometimes OCD can then come in on the back end if it doesn't go as you planned, right? You get COVID, something else goes wrong, and say, see, this was bad. And we should have stayed with what I was saying as the OCD. And I think recognizing that ERP in general is not about proving that bad things don't happen. It's about proving that you can live with uncertainty and going into your decision-making, recognizing that you're making the best decision you can. And it's sort of like looking at a weather prediction. It can say there's a 30% chance of rain, and so you have a picnic anyway and it rains on you. Right? I mean, there was still a 30% chance. Things can happen. But that doesn't mean that you should stop doing exposure, that it's good to listen to all of OCD's rigid things. It just means that sometimes, even though we do the best thing best we can and make the best decisions we can, we end up with COVID, things go wrong. And just recognizing that and being compassionate with yourself and recognizing you can't control the outcome. You can just make the best decisions you can make with the information you have at the time.
Shala, I'm going to stick with you a second. Michelle jumped the line in the questions. I apologize if you have complaints for the IOCDF. Please make them to Michelle. I don't ever jump questions, so I apologize for insubordination. Crystal at 7:38 p.m. I'm going to throw this to Shala because I think this will resonate to a lot of individuals. Any advice for my 15-year-old daughter who has been diagnosed this past year? We literally started ERP this week. I love that, but I think there's a lot of expectation with I started ERP now what and how quickly and all. Can you talk to some of that, Shala?
So great for starting ERP this week. And I think the advice that I would have is focus on why you're doing the ERP. Focus on what you want, the outcome. I want a life where I can spend time with my friends and do the things I want to do. Really focus on the future that you see for yourself as motivation to do these really hard things in the moment. And know that there is tremendous hope for people with OCD. For as debilitating as it is highly treatable. So I think keeping all that in mind is really good to do as you're getting started with a type of therapy that can literally change your life for the better.
Thank you, Shala. Kim or Michelle, anything? Yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
Can I add? This is actually, Shala addressed the kid, but I want to address the parents real quick. Is as a parent whose child just started ERP, is make sure to manage your expectations. Don't expect that all of a sudden, because they just started ERP, that their OCD is going to be gone or they're going to be able to do things that they weren't able to do. I've had lots of clients, parents who were super excited that they started and like jumped the line in their hierarchy or their exposure list. So really, work with your child and work with their therapist to figure out, how you can best support them without being, super disappointed that, well, they started ERP. Why are they not getting out of the shower faster? Or why are they not, doing the things that we want them to do?
And same goes for adults. Don't sit there and be like, I started ERP 3 weeks ago. Why am I not better? And don't use feelings as a gauge.
Yeah. And I would add something really maybe helpful for you is that, the work of ERP is about, can you tolerate discomfort, right? Emotions, thoughts, feelings, sensations, and urges. But to watch your child have to face their fear often means that you as the parent have to do ERP as well, which is to tolerate your feelings about it and tolerate your thoughts about it and to sort of ride that wave as you watch them go through that, so that you don't come in and swoop them up and take all their pain away. Or and I've had to catch myself with this, is if I'm watching my child and they're not maybe using their tools the way that you may want them to not come in and try to fix it and you overly coach them. You kind of do have to practice tolerating your own discomfort as well. You want to support them and guide them depending on their age, but you're working with your wave of discomfort just like they are.
Yeah, for sure. Shala, anything else to add? I love when people find treatment and therapy. It excites me so much. And I'll also add, I think one of the most important things that I learned throughout this process, which is like, I think as a parent, and I'm not a parent, I mean, I'm a parent to kitties and hopefully one day human beings, if the kitties survive, but that's a joke. They're fine. I will say that, I think, and my mom can speak to this, but I think that separating your child from their OCD is really important, because I think, as your child, adult or otherwise or younger, begins to engage in resisting compulsions, as you are told to not reassure or enable them, it will most likely get frustrating and hard, and kids will get upset and even angry. And patience is worn thin. It's a worth it process, but it's not necessarily an easy process, and it can be hard sometimes. And I think it's important to recognize that when your kiddo's getting upset and angry because you're not flipping that light switch or you're not bringing them that thing, that's their OCD talking. And so, when you're told to say things or do things that don't normally sound like what you would do. You're talking directly to their OCD in an effort to put it to bed and not your kid. So, and you'll learn more about that as you get into treatment, but just making that separation between the disease, the disorder, and the person is really helpful. Also, because from a guilt standpoint, in the beginning, I don't want to speak for everybody, but it's super hard to not do what you've been doing for your kid for so long. My mom and father reassured and enabled me until I was 31 years old, thinking they were doing the right thing. The minute they were taught to stop doing that, it felt terrible. It felt awful for me to cry and get upset and scream and yell and them to say no. But, when they learned they were torturing my OCD to make me better, and the other thing was making me sicker, and those were the kind of things that really help put things into perspective and frame things in a way that they can embrace the treatment in a meaningful way. With that, I'll read my mom's comment, because if I don't, she'll kill me. Not that she has any power over me anymore. I'm just saying. At 8:04 p.m., Liz Smith wrote, "It was such a relief to finally understand what OCD was all about. It is so hard to recognize because it has so many forms. It took 30 years to find a therapist to treat Ethan properly and guide us. We jumped right into therapy too. You must learn all you can. Knowledge is power. When dealing with OCD is a family commitment." Well put, Mom. Just above that, 8:02 p.m. Great question. We're wrapping up. This is the last 10 minutes. I want to keep it on time because I want to be respectful of everybody's. During COVID lockdowns, I had such a bad imposter syndrome, and I think there should be a relation between OCD and imposter syndrome. Maybe I have a lot of time to meditate about my life. Am I wrong? Great question. We hear about imposter syndrome all the time. I think a lot of therapists felt imposter syndrome with the onset of COVID. Am I capable of doing this because I feel these things? Michelle, you're nodding your head more ferociously than anyone else on the panel. Take it away. Don't forget to unmute yourself, though.
All right. No, I agree. I think a lot of people have imposter syndrome. I don't know that I have much to add to this. I think it's tolerating that you have imposter syndrome and accepting that you might have imposter syndrome and using that as an exposure.
Is it a real syndrome?
Sure, why not? I mean, it's not in the DSM.
I'm genuinely asking. I talk about it. I've had imposter syndrome at different times. Is it specifically related to OCD? Can you have it without any? I mean, is it a diagnosis?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's not in the DSM. It's not specific to OCD. I think I remember as a brand new therapist, as an intern, right out of grad school, sitting there espousing, I forget how I'm saying that, knowledge. And I'm sitting here with, across from some 60-year-old woman and telling her how she should have her marriage. I'm single. I'm in my early 20s. What do I actually know about this? So I think everybody at some point has imposter syndrome. Am I good at my job? Do I deserve this person I'm in a relationship with? Whatever. It's not specific to OCD.
And I would add that imposter syndrome is often surrounds themes of doubt, right? And people who have OCD often struggle around doubt. And it's very similar to struggling around uncertainty. So for those who ask, imposter syndrome is the sort of, in general, it's not a diagnosis. I don't think it would be considered a medical syndrome. I don't know if there is any code for that, but it's often the feeling that you're not trained, you're not have enough experience to be doing the thing that you do. So you might, as I wrote my book, I had a lot of imposter syndrome. Who am I to write this book? Who am I to be doing all this? That kind of thing. So that was an example of imposter syndrome. And I do think that it may be correlated with OCD because of the doubt factor, and also it's often a lot to do with negative thoughts about yourself, right? I'm not good enough. I don't deserve enough good things, or I don't have what it takes to do these things. So I think it can be correlated with, but I don't know anyone who hasn't experienced imposter syndrome, if I'm being honest.
I think it makes sense that imposter syndrome could flare during lockdowns too, because we get tacit reassurance from people that we're interacting with and working with. And if you're not interacting with people as much because you're locked down, you're not getting that. And I think everybody gets that sort of just normal reassurance just from your interactions with people on a day-to-day basis, not just in an OCD way. And when that's stripped away, that can feed those doubts of, oh gosh, do I really know what I'm doing?
Absolutely. Even little bits of imposter syndrome tend to sneak in. Michelle will be proud of me, but I did not have a good weekend. It was one of the worst weekends I'd had probably in maybe 6 or 7 years as regards to OCD anxiety. I was like just on the floor flat, and I'll probably talk about it in my next community conversations. But anyway, today I was writing an email and giving some advice to somebody that wrote in and had a question, and I stopped and I was like, wait, do I even have the right to say this right now? Because like I just went through this, and why should I give advice? And so it's like, yes, it always seeps in, and Heather behind the scenes made a great comment. Sorry to call you out, Heather, but she wrote, there's been a lot more free time to ruminate, which is fertile ground for imposter syndrome. Absolutely agree, Heather. Thank you for that. Real quick, I want to be cognizant of time. I do want to address Rachel Binney's question. Rachel's a dear friend in the UK. I hope you're doing well, Rachel. She wrote 8:19 p.m. for Heather. She wrote, for Kimberly, if possible, my daughter is being denied an ARFID diagnosis as she has OCD and autism. Instead, our eating disorder team say it's disordered eating, not an eating disorder, and refuse to help. Any advice, please? And FYI, Rachel's in the UK.
I would consider maybe getting a second opinion on that. It's always helpful to get, a second set of eyes, particularly if their solution or their diagnosis doesn't lead you to any real treatment options. I think that ARFID is absolutely an eating disorder. It's sort of like a crossover between OCD and an eating disorder. And so, yes, it may be that their eating disorder facility isn't equipped to take care of that, but that doesn't mean that it disqualifies your daughter with that diagnosis to get resources and treatment. So I would maybe consider looking at a different, a different treatment team who could maybe help, or asking your team right now where they could send you to get that correct treatment. And now it's the same in the US. It's very hard to get an eating disorder and OCD therapists who are trained and specialized in both, or even in patient facilities. It's getting better, but it's still very difficult, particularly with how, our mental health field is pretty taxed out right now. So I would just encourage you to keep trying. If you've got the diagnosis, you've got your diagnosis. I would keep trying.
And I will just add that there's often a correlation between autism and ARFID. Mm-hmm. I find that there's a high, I think there's a little bit higher with patients with ARFID, with autism. And I think that, as Kimberly was saying, it's hard to find a therapist who knows OCD and ARFID, but also add in that complication. I don't want to say complication, that sounds wrong, but complication of also a therapist trained in OCD, ARFID, and autism to be able to work with that. So good luck.
And the thing to remember too is disordered eating, if we were to claim that, is you're going to use the same skills and tools and treatment modalities. So, tomato, tomato, that's the thing, is it's still going to require the same treatment if you can find.
We have, and thank you, Kim, we have so many great questions. Stay tuned, and I will tell you we can get those questions as soon as tomorrow at noon. But before we do, I want to give final thoughts to Shala and Michelle and Kim before wrapping up. Michelle, if I don't call on you first, my mom's it's just in my head now. I'm worrying about it. So, Michelle, final thoughts for, we've had a great panel tonight and some great comments and thoughts. Any final thoughts?
If you didn't call on me first, your rate was going to go up.
No, I was nodding more than Michelle.
It already went up. What are you going to do?
He's like, I've already been with you for an hour today. What do I need to hear you from? I think I'm going to steal from Kimberly a little bit, but I think the last 2 years have been really difficult. And I just keep reminding my patients that it has been really difficult. We need to remember that it's been really difficult and to show ourselves some compassion for that. And that, we have to do what's best for us in the moment. And so if that means, as Kimberly was saying, like check in with your values, if you need to get out and see friends because your mental health is suffering, that's important. I think it's really important to just give ourselves some grace and know that I don't want to say everybody's suffering. A lot of people are struggling. You're not the only one struggling, because I know we feel a lot alone in the struggle. And when we see on social media that somebody's out doing something or having a good time, it's also just a snippet of what they're doing, and it's not everything. So they could be crying and then go post something of them smiling, and it looks like everything is fine.
Thank you, Michelle. Kim.
I think the thing I would add, sort of to speak to one of the questions, is just to remind you, one of the compassionate statements you may want to make is that we're doing the best we can with what we have. I think that we have this idea that we should be doing the best we can. Then that's it. Like, you have to be doing the best and it has to be perfect. And I think it's important just to sort of bring yourself down to the fact that you're doing the best you can with what you have, which might not be a lot right now. And so just sort of hopefully you can adjust your expectations of yourself and give yourself permission to give yourself a break for how you're coping.
Thank you, Kim. Appreciate it. Shala, final thoughts.
I read an article today about the pandemic that said that people are working to accept uncertainty as the normal. And people with OCD who've done ERP are in the best position to be able to do that, because ERP is really teaching you to be okay and to embrace uncertainty and recognizing you do have a lot of good skills. You may actually have more skills than the general population. And being kind to yourself if you're not able to use them all the time, but recognize that you are really skilled. Give yourself that credit, because if you've done ERP, you do have a black belt in handling uncertainty.
Thank you, Shala. And thank you all for the very, very kind comments. Everybody's really enjoying it. So thank you for the sweet comments. And again, thank you to Shala, Michelle, and Kim. I'll wrap up quickly. Stay tuned. I'll give you some last minute information. So first of all, as always, I want to thank Heather behind the scenes for keeping the light on. That's my new line. Last year it was Digital Voodoo. It's keeping the lights on. Let me know. Feel free to vote, email. We'll see if it goes. This is one of many live streams. You can view the entire live stream schedule and on iocdf.org/peace of mind. You can also submit questions or have your questions answered and submit topics. So iocdf.org/peace of mind. If you didn't get your question answered, and I apologize that we ran out of time, tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, we have Ask the Experts, an open Q&A at 12 p.m. with Dr. Liz and Chris Tronsden. So carry your questions on over to there, and they will be happy to answer them. Finally, that's not you. You're not researchers. But yeah, I think that's so. Remember to subscribe and get notified when live streams are scheduled. And I think they changed all the scripts. This is all new stuff here. Always, if you need info, resources or more information, please don't hesitate to visit iocdf.org. And if you have any questions as well, you can always email the foundation at info@iocdf.org. There it goes. I also saw Eric. The only reason I'm going to do this, I saw Eric volunteer my email address on the thread. So now I feel that I need to. So if you want to reach me directly, you can email me at justethan@iocdf.org. There it is. I answer those emails directly. So please feel free. Also, if you have any other questions for Shala, Michelle, or Kim, feel free to email me there. I'll make sure they get the questions and we'll get you answers. With that, 2 minutes over, not terrible. Thank you, Shala. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Kim. Thank you all also, as always, for advocating for yourselves and for others and for supporting everyone. This is really awesome. So until next time, tune in tomorrow night, tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern. Stay safe, stay vigilant, feel the feels. Don't let OCD off the hook, and we'll see you next time. Have a good night. Oh, we're all waving. Left hand. Wait, it's all mirrored. I don't know what I'm doing.